Hello, this is Mike Swanson, and you're listening to the Wall Street Window Podcast. In a few moments, I'm going to speak with Carmine Savastano, who runs the website tpac.com, stands for Two Princes and a King. That's the title of the book that Carmine wrote about the three major assassinations in the United States in the 1960s. It came out in 2014, but Carmine has a new book coming out in February, available for pre-order, called Human Time Bomb. And the conversation I'm about to have with him is the third and final one about a blog post he did about the origins of violence, and I'm linking to it with the notes to this podcast. Before I talk to him, I want to just give you a heads up. Likely you're seeing this on Friday. That's when it gets posted on my website, Wall Street Window. But it also goes out immediately before then on iTunes, Spreaker, all these podcast catchers. So you could be hearing it on there, but wherever you're hearing it, we're looking to upgrade the website over this holiday weekend. We're going to be moving it to a new server. Evidently, we are taxing the resources of the one we're already on because we're getting a little bit too much traffic. It's not really that we've seen a traffic explosion. It's just the server we're on is having trouble, I guess. And they're going to move us to another one where it will be more dedicated to just this one website and not a lot, not us and a bunch of hundreds or who knows how many on this thing. So this should speed up the website when it's all done, but it may disrupt things for a little bit this weekend. So I'm not likely to make any posts on Monday. It's a holiday, and we'll be using this time to try to optimize things, and hopefully we won't have any big glitches. And things will go pretty smooth. But once we're done with that, I plan on doing other things to try to optimize and speed up the site, the load time. Sometimes it's slow, especially on the iPad or phones, and I don't even notice it because I don't really load it up on my phone or use the phone that much at all. But more and more people do, and the whole website, if you look at it, in fact, it's created for desktops because I'm the one who did it. And if you load it up on a phone, the title of it isn't even centered correctly. So there's lots of things we need to change. More and more traffic comes from people using cell phones. More and more stock trading is done on apps. And I'm kind of always a couple years behind in these situations and trying to catch up. So that's what's going on. And let's talk with Carmine Savastano after one quick break.
Go ahead, caller.
I'm interested in the truth about the JFK assassination.
Right. Well, what do you want to know?
Judy Baker's wild claim, Oswald girlfriend, she knew Ruby and Barry, cancer weapons. Really?
I imagine I could claim I have four wheels. It doesn't make me a wagon, but okay.
Oswald was on the kill team and trying to prevent the murder of John Kennedy. Come on now. Has a real expert on the JFK assassination looked into her claims?
Go to Amazon.com, enter Judith Baker in her own words. You'll get results for a digital copy of a book where Walt Brown utilizes her own words and the known evidence in the case to get at, well, a different perspective, let's say. You can get Judith Barry Baker in her own words from the author himself, signed if you request it by contacting Dr. Brown at KIASJFK@AOL.com. It's a fun book, and it actually dissects the many, many fantastic claims. Judith Barry Baker in her own words.
Thank you for all the great information.
Hi, Carmine. How you doing?
Pretty good, Mike. How are you?
Oh, good. Well, we talked before we did this and figured what we would do is do a follow-up on this origins of violence study you did a couple weeks ago. It's really a prelude to the book you have coming out titled Human Time Bomb, coming out in February. People can pre-order that. They just go to Amazon and type Human Time Bomb. But you go through three things that are the real triggers for violent behavior. First of fear, and then disgust, which is an unusual thing people might not think of offhand, but we spoke about that last time. But the third thing is status. So how does status cause violence?
Well, I think this is another kind of like disgust. This one definitely is much more known, I would say, than disgust. But status isn't one that I think people would automatically think leads to violence, but it leads to conflict, which leads to violence. And status is probably one of the most significant drivers of our behavior, and it's in all of our lives. There's a role in our decisions that we might not appreciate that has larger considerations for each of our behaviors. So status is a natural desire you see in pretty much all creatures, but you can often see it in primates, to establish social groups and form hierarchies. All creatures need. It's an ironic thing about some portions of society these days that people complain about hierarchies, and that hierarchies are bad and the corruption of hierarchies. And while it is true that hierarchies can become corrupt and that is bad, and we should correct, and they have to be corrective. You have to fix the hierarchy, otherwise the hierarchy just becomes more and more corrupt. But hierarchies in and of themselves are not negative. They're good. You need a hierarchy. And people don't seem to be able to give the proper context. Some people, anyway, don't seem to be able to give the proper context to the necessity of a hierarchy. Because without a hierarchy, you can't develop any sort of system of status. And then no one knows how to function. For instance, the old saying, too many cooks ruin the broth. If everyone's in charge, then no one's in charge. If everyone's giving commands, then no one's doing anything. So there has to be a hierarchy.
Well, we live in an interesting society where people's status can change in that sort of situation of their hierarchy, where they fit in a hierarchy, may change moment to moment.
Yeah.
For example, someone can be a parent, and therefore they have high status when it comes to the rest of their family or their children. And then 15 minutes later, after taking a drive in a car, be at work and be an employee subject to the orders of a boss, and then go out for lunch, and they're giving an order to a waiter or waitress or whatnot, and then a police officer could pull them over as they go home. I mean, so this could all fluctuate moment by moment.
Yeah, that is an interesting observation too. That is very relevant, because we all have varying levels of status depending on the situation, and that status can change, as you said, moment to moment. And some people might not be able to process that quickly. So they become more enraged, or they can actually become violent, because they might enjoy a certain high status in most situations, but in a certain situation, they might not have high status. So then they compensate. They become upset that they're getting treated like they treat everyone else.
Yeah, no, it's quite crazy. But I wonder if it could cause, for some people, confusion.
Yes.
And for example, maybe a confusing environment is the internet. because if you get on a message board or Facebook or some of these social areas on the internet, it's not readily apparent where your status is, or who is even the leader or the expert or has any authority.
Well, yeah, and then you can also introduce the problem of anonymity. So then you have people faking status and people misrepresenting other people's status.
Oh, that's makes it even more confusing. Well, I've had websites since 2000 or 1999, and even before then, I had
I mean, before the internet as we know it, I had a bulletin board where you could dial in, and it's not even worth talking about, but most people don't even know what I'm talking about. But put it this way, I had like a message board before, people were getting on the internet where people could dial in and get on it. And what I found is that these message board type things kind of have a pattern to them often, where if they're not properly policed, and I wasn't properly policing them, what'll happen is you'll get a lot of interaction among the members, and it can grow, but ultimately somebody in there will try to dominate and take over the entire thing and bully people and become really angry and mean, and and they'll get a following by doing this. Where it'll end up dividing the entire message board, and I've seen this happen on message boards I've had, and wasn't posting enough and not policing it well enough, that it could last for a couple years, then it would collapse because of this, and I just end up just shutting the entire thing down. And I'm saying all this because I think this whole thing I'm speaking about was all driven by some individual seeking status.
Oh, I agree. That certainly was a motivation, most likely, behind what they were doing. And you can, and it is a recurring thing you can see in, message boards.
And status doesn't have to mean money either.
No,
right?
no. Yeah.
So,
I think money is a form of status. Money, influence, power. People, the poorest people in society can sometimes have the greatest status, as you were saying about, in different situations, people find themselves. Think of someone who works at a government office. It could be someone who makes $20,000 a year, doesn't even really make any money at all, almost just barely above the poverty line. But in a certain situation, they might be the person that determines your destiny. Because you need something done at a certain time, and they're the person to get it done. So status, situationally can not only can it vary, but people who wouldn't be thought of as influential or powerful can be in the moment, which is why sometimes you'll see people abuse their power because they come to care about it so much. It becomes a defining trait of their personality, their status, and that's why people can have such adverse reactions when they lose status or someone they don't like gain status. It's what a lot of people don't realize is that we start off in our families in that social situation, and we learn about status, we strive for status, and then that recurs later in social interactions with friends and coworkers and other members of the public. And these useful or negative habits, they'll begin, and they'll define the larger successes and failures later on in our life, because those are the strategies we developed in our youth. Now, some people might not realize that they're using the strategies, because not all of them are always positive strategies, but that is largely where we draw from, and we build our basis from there. So, like you were saying about, people that would take over and destroy the forum or the board, like all things, there's positive and there's negative status, and humans will award either depending on the circumstances and the impressions of the situation and those connected to it. And it can be awarded or removed on the basis of, several factors, physical abilities or lack thereof, natural talents or colossal failures, notable performances or deficient ones, and merit or infamy. And we can observe people comparing others of controversy to examples of famous or infamous people with allusions to a similar basis of status. It's so powerful, status, that it can outlive a person's contemporary actions. We still talk about Julius Caesar. That's some status. That guy's status has carried on for thousands of years. I mean, that's how important status is to us, that we note all of the heroes and the villains forever, as long as we remember.
Well, why is it so important?
Well, I think it's because I don't necessarily think it does, but we as humans, it is a defining part of us to the rest of the world. We have a intrinsic need within ourselves to be well regarded and to gain the deference of others. We require it for some reason. And some people can't do that with just positive status, so they then embrace negative status. And that's where
What?
you get the, immoral behavior.
I was listening to this interview the other week by an author of a book I was reading. But anyway, someone in the audience asked this guy a question, and the person asked this question was talking about the world we live in. A lot of people, the person was sharing this feeling, think it's a lot of illusion or getting out of control, or weird things are happening, so to speak. Let's put it that way. And I mean, if you turn on the media, I'm not trying to get into all that, but there's a lot of hyperbole and a lot of division, and it's always something happening that's out of the ordinary to get your attention. But what this person was saying was, or asking, was he wondered if, despite all the talk of everything being out of control or seeming to be, if you just go to the store, to your grocery store or anywhere down the street, everything seems to be completely normal. Nothing is really that much different from where it was a year ago. So he was wondering, what does that mean? Things are normal, or what? Which is the correct assumption? I've linked this to what you're saying in a second. The author answering the question said something interesting about people and humans is we seek normalcy. So he is saying no matter how extreme something is going on, people will still want something like a normal day-to-day life. Even if you're living in a complete war zone, for example, or even a concentration camp, to get even more extreme, people living even in those environments, they still do social things. They still, look to have relationships with each other, and split up into hierarchies and so forth. So I bring all this up to say, and the guy was saying, well, this is just how we are. We all are like this. And there's probably some link to status with this. Like, we're all social people,
Oh yeah. Well, we're all certainly we're social. I think one of the things I discuss in the book is that we are highly social creatures, but some of us will resort to antisocial behavior if normal social methods don't work. The violence comes from failed strategies at social interaction usually. You'll see in all sorts of creatures, when one creature mating, for instance, if there's two competing, this is a great example for how it leads to violence. Imagine this: every love triangle ever in humanity.
Well, that's what makes it a story.
Yeah. But, that's where the conflict comes from. They're both seeking status. They both want to be the beloved of the same person. So just that alone, imagine all of the tragedy and horror and fighting that has happened from every love triangle that's ever happened or will happen. And that's just that, that competition. It's that status striving that is present in all of us. And you can see that it's built in as a natural function because, for instance, like You and I have discussed this before off air, and it's another one of the examples I use in the book. But you can see with males, for instance, and with females, with humans, that male humans will seek to gain status by hunting, and they'll actually go to even greater lengths, even more dangerous lengths for the extra status. For instance, like they will male humans, they've noticed this since tribal times of humans, that when a male, let's say that they want to get the highest status and there's only easily acquired animals from safe areas around the tribal area, well, they'll actually go outside of the safe areas to more dangerous areas to get the same animal that they could get safely nearby, because they get more status for going to the dangerous area to get it.
Ain't that something?
Yeah, so they will endanger their lives just to have more status.
Well, obviously they do it because they think it's going to benefit them.
Yeah, well, and it does sometimes. Sometimes there is a real big payoff for the status striving. There are, you look in our society, there are people that take great chances and gain great rewards, but usually they don't. Usually it's a great failure. So, and that and I mean, you can see the amount. Just what's crazy is when you think about it now. Once upon a time, I'm sure that there were people who just sat around and gossiped about other people, but now it's a business model. So the failures and successes of others are a daily offering that you can go to a number of websites and see every day. From the most important things where a business fails or a country fails to the most, minuscule, ridiculous things where somebody tripped or made a fool of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's all status. We're obsessed with it. all the papers, all the tabloids, all that rumor mongering, that's all status. And it is, when you really look at the larger picture, I mean, it's almost an endless amount of it, because you've got this core of genuine status behavior where it's good and bad, and then now you've got this atmosphere around it of all these people and businesses and the public constantly sniping and adding status to where it's just a huge interlocking system now. And I'd say, one of the problems, we need status. It's not going away. There's no way to remove our need for status or to stop humans from striving for status. We're going to. It's in our biology. So we can't do that. But we do have to guard against unfair attacks or awards of status. We shouldn't just, I think that's one of the problems in our society now, and I've gotten into, I'm sure, and I will get into more arguments about this, but I don't think, for instance, like celebrity used to mean something. And I know that makes me sound like a 100-year-old man, but it's true. Celebrity at one point, or infamy even, there were certain things required for it. You had to actually do something as far as meritorious or infamous behavior. You couldn't just put on a facade of being something without actually doing something. And that has receded in modern times. There are a lot of people that represent themselves as something, but they don't actually do anything. They don't actually go out there and put the actions behind the claims. And so they're largely kind of like the internet. They're not really what they say they are. They're a representation of it. They want the status of being that, even though they actually aren't that.
Are you talking about Doug Polk?
Doug Polk?
Yeah, I'm just.
Oh, who's that?
He's no, it's funny. He's an Instagram person, one of these a Twitter, Instagram celebrity, that got big by doing pictures of himself in Las Vegas playing poker and stuff.
Yeah,
but he's not really an expert poker player. and he attacks other poker players, that are professionals and stuff, and then gets a big following doing it.
Well, yeah, and you see that. That's probably a perfect example, because you see that in almost every different type of job and activity and hobby. For every person that does something well, there's 10 people there to criticize or build them up. It's actually it's a business extravaganza in some respects.
But I should have even said the guy's name, but
well, no, that's fine.
There's a million people doing that. Is the real point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, how many people? It's just what it is. It's just.
Well, and that's fine. We're gonna have legit.
This guy has made more money than I ever had playing poker.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that what he does is worthwhile. I think that's the big thing we have to remember that has become lost in the shuffle these days, is that people, just because someone makes money doing something doesn't mean it's status worthy. People.
Well, that's probably a better point to make than I was. Yeah, because you could probably think of better examples where, this guy has won money at playing cards. It's just what he does is attack other people so much and attack people who are better than he is.
Yeah.
That's just what people are doing on there. But there's people, who haven't done anything at all doing that sort of thing too.
Well, and they're aspiring. See, I think the problem is that, in this, no matter who the person is, if you decide to take the negative tact, you can succeed, and it'll be easier than actually gaining the proper skills and meritorious behavior and earning your way to the level you want to get to. But the cost is it's going to destabilize your relationships, and eventually people are going to want to get revenge on you. So it's kind of a never-ending cycle, the negative cycle. If live by the sword, die by the sword. If that's how you treat people, be assured one day when someone has the opportunity, they will treat you like that as well.
Yeah, that's what happens.
So, it's not going to stop. I mean, there's always going to be people who utilize negative status and people who attack other people to try to gain themselves positive status. And sometimes it's rightful. Sometimes there's a justification for attacking someone. You are correct. They have violated, because, we all, there's some people will admit this or not, most humans recognize that there are acceptable and unacceptable behaviors, no matter where you're from. We often hear people try to make excuses for various parts of the world, including the United States, when someone does something illegal or immoral, and try to say, well, it's their culture, or it's how they were raised, or their religion, but no matter what the excuse is, there are certain behaviors we all know are wrong. Murder, theft, violence. We all know they're wrong. No one has to tell us they're wrong. There's an intrinsic feeling within us that knows it's wrong. So, and that's status. That in itself, there is a negative status to certain behaviors that we all pretty much can see are destructive. So when people try to justify it with those excuses I told you earlier, that just normalizes it, makes it easier for some people to get away with certain negative behaviors that they shouldn't.
Well, I think everyone, you have to figure out, as you said, seeking status is a part of human nature, everybody, in some form or another. And I guess maybe one of the most important things to do in your life is to figure out what sorts of status is worth going after and what isn't, and when to stop.
Well, yeah, I think that last thing is key, because most people don't know when to stop, and it becomes a self-defeating proposition in time, because where you see, for instance, at the highest levels of anything, it's the law of diminishing returns. At some point, you're going to be putting in so much effort that you're not getting back anything close to what you're putting in.
And you think of like I'm a baseball fan, and there's a scandal going on now with the Houston Astros a couple years ago. Were cheating using technology to steal the signs of other players, and they had a special room set up to do this. And now they've gotten in trouble, and some of the people that were involved went to other teams. Became a manager of the Mets, became a manager of the Red Sox, and they've just been canned this week. And before that happened, there were baseball players that were taking steroids at one time, a lot of them. So the point is, here are people that were going after status, and they were doing things to cut corners, and it bit them.
And look at all the effort. Like, imagine if they would have all that effort, if they would have taken all that effort and instead put it into productive things for the team.
Yeah, exactly.
They might have actually gotten done what they wanted to do by cheating.
Yeah.
So that's the lesson, really. I mean, I'm not saying that everyone is always, and we're all going to find ourselves in a situation sometimes when perhaps we can't use positive status. We're going to use negative status, or we're going to unfortunately be subject to negative status. But that doesn't mean that you just abandon positive status and then embrace negative status and charge forward. I mean, some people do that, but but I wouldn't suggest it. It's not going to lead down a good road. You're constantly going to have to be putting more and more effort in just to get done what you could normally if you would just be more diplomatic.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Well, do you have any last thoughts on the topic?
Well, no, I think we've covered everything pretty well. I like some of the examples, definitely, that you offered. I think that they hopefully have illuminated what we're trying to explain to everybody about status, the importance of it, and that it's overlooked a lot of times. A lot of people don't realize, but it's a great motivator. I mean, if you look during the course of your day and you break down what you're doing, you're going to run into status a lot. You're going to run into wanting, trying to advance in almost any profession. You're trying to increase your status. And then you're going to be dealing, as Mike said, with all these different, various levels of status that you have from day to day, and sometimes that can be confusing. So it's good to know about these things and know that what our internal motivators are that we might not be aware of.
Well, I just, one thing I'd like to add is that we live in a time where we're more bombarded than ever by advertisements and messaging and propaganda nonstop, because it's coming from our phones, our computers and devices, not just the television set. 20 years ago, people would complain about TV doing all these things to people, but now they're plugged in all the time, and I think people need to unplug in order to get perspective on these things and think about them.
Yeah, we can't. I think I said this in the last episode when we talked about disgust. We have to self-regulate. We cannot count on companies and the government to do it for us.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to.
They're not. No, they're going to ramp it up, and because they want you as agitated as they can make you. It's what they want to do to everybody. It's just to keep so you just will stay fixated on their.
Well, yeah, it's
on their in their control, their devices and whatnot, and going in circles basically.
Well, it keeps us constructively channeled.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
If everybody's, and it's not very constructive for us, but it's constructive for them.
Yeah, Zuckerberg is laughing all the way to the bank every day.
It's making a lot of people money. It's keeping a lot of people in power. It makes what I don't think people, and I know we got to go, so I'll make this quick as a final thought. But the complexity of the system lends itself to keeping us busy with other things. If there's all this entertainment and there's all this spectacle, it's like we've talked about before. It's the bread and circuses of the Roman Empire. It's a lot of show and a lot of fireworks. It's the bang at the end of a song to keep the public busy while people are trying to get as much money out of the society and gain as much power and status as they can.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking the time to talk with me, and we'll do another interview soon. Maybe get into some more of the deep research you're doing.
Cool. It'll be good to talk with you next time. Thanks for having me on, and take care.
Thank you.